Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Players NIL Podcast and my special guest today from Western New York, Mr. John Jiloty. John, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Mark.
Thank you for joining us. And for those who don't know, John is the Senior VP of Growth Channels and Content at the Martin Group in Buffalo, New York. We reflect that we call it Western New York. And John and I have had a lot of contact points in the last 20 years, mostly through the sport of lacrosse. He was an editor in one of the lacrosse publications that when you're a young parent trying to get your kids noticed, you hope that they would write about. So, and then he was instrumental in supporting one of the projects I was on 10 years ago in the production of Crooked Arrows. And so he's grown his business beyond the sport of lacrosse and into digital marketing. We'll talk a little bit about that. His experience at Syracuse University, his interest in athletics. And so, John, at the Players NIL Podcast, we asked 3 questions. Question number 1 is, tell me about your earliest memories as it relates to sports, being a fan, being an athlete, who you went with, what you did, who you remember watching. How did you become interested in sports?
Yeah, so started early on, and thanks first off for the opportunity. Really appreciate you connecting here. Upstate people, always tend to gravitate and maintain contact. So I love connecting with a former upstater like yourself. But I grew up in a little bit in upstate New York, but also in Chicago. So was a big Bulls fan, Michael Jordan, obviously at the time, Cubs fan. My neighbor had season tickets, went to a lot of Cubs games. The Bears had just won the Super Bowl, so they were pretty good. Big Walter Payton fan. Obviously, I'm dating myself a little bit, but it was also obviously into golf. My dad was a golfer, so we went to the Western Open, the U.S. Open. I remember actually one of my fondest memories probably is walking up to, it was a Pro-Am. Michael Jordan was playing golf. My dad was taking pictures of me. He had taken pictures like the day before or something. So he gave me a printed picture to give to Michael. Like Michael's really going to want a picture from, like, he's got a million pictures of himself, but he's like, give it to him. He's a sales guy at Kodak at the time. So there's probably an ulterior motive. So I got actually up next to him as he walked from one hole to the other. And I actually lifted it up to give it to him. And I couldn't say anything because I was so nervous. I don't know. I was probably like 5 or 6 and I couldn't even hear what he said through all the traffic, but he said something about, and all the kids had said, oh, he's telling everybody to meet him later afterward to get an autograph after the tournament or after the event. And he didn't take the photo, obviously. And so we all met afterward at this, at this weird spot that I don't even know how we all knew to meet there behind some clubhouse. And he peeled out in his blue, M8 BMW and took off and didn't give us anything. But at the time, it didn't impact my infatuation with Michael or the Bulls or basketball or athletes in general. It didn't bother me at all. But that was just, and I'll never forget that. But I didn't care. I was like, okay, he can do whatever he wants to do. But so I guess I've been involved with sports, ever since then. I played soccer my whole life, golf my whole life, skied my whole life until now, including, pretty active, fitness world currently. So still trying to stay as active as I can. My 2 girls are into soccer and lacrosse a little bit, really into skiing, which is awesome to see. So kind of seeing it from the other side now as a parent, finally, after dealing with, tons of crazy parents in the lacrosse world for a long time. So sports has been a part of everything I've done. My job that I got in Buffalo at the Martin Group is through, Todd Martin's son played lacrosse, and that was my connection. That was my way in the door to meet him. So when I was networking and trying to move back closer to home, so the sports world has given back to me, and from a physical standpoint, but also from a professional standpoint too, for since day one.
Great. Love the story about Michael Jordan and the non-autograph story. And you and probably 14 million kids had the same exact experience. So, the Players NIL is about educating student athletes about their options and about maximizing their potential for the future. And using sports to do that is one way to do it. Of course, we could use music and art and travel in lots of different ways, but your family as well as mine, saw that sports was a way to educate. And so you take this fandom, you take this interest, you go to one of the great sports institutions in the world, Syracuse University. Tell us about your life at Syracuse and some of your exposure to athletics there.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I knew I wanted to be involved in journalism at the time, so went right up to the Daily Orange, our student-run paper at the time, and started covering sports. I started covering men's soccer and wrestling And then that worked its way into, kind of the big three were, men's lacrosse and men's basketball and football. So it was quickly covering those sports. And, and I never really, didn't have much lacrosse background prior to that. To be honest, we didn't have it at my high school in Rochester until my senior year. We had a modified team. So started covering lacrosse and got involved. That was, the Casey Powell and Ryan Powell overlap, kind of those couple years there in the late 90s. So that was kind of my initial exposure, but it was great to kind of see the different sports and work with different athletes and understand the other side of kind of the media and kind of how they talk to the media and promote the teams and kind of that whole side of it. So I did a lot of that. Was all 4 years really at Syracuse, was covering those teams, ended up kind of doing internships as a sports writer for Washington Times and Syracuse Post Standard and doing some freelancing here and there. So covered some other, ended up covering professional sports and a lot of other levels during my college career, but Syracuse is really kind of where you get exposed to that. And, the sports journalism side of the Syracuse world is huge. And as everybody knows, like from radio to print to TV, I mean, everybody's, the throng of media that cover Syracuse sports is second to none, mainly because of the students. But it was a huge part of the community there. And those are professional sports in Central New York, as you know. So it's a big part of the community there and cool to kind of see the interactions of a Jim Boeheim or a Paul Pasqualoni or, at the time, Roy Simmons and then John Desko transition on that side. So, but down to the other sports, the men's soccer and wrestling. So wrestling got cut when I was there. And so I had to cover that and the impact that they had on those guys. I mean, they had an Olympian on the team, a U.S. Olympian on the team, and the program got cut, for funding reasons. So that was pretty crazy. So you deal with that kind of side of it and the emotional impact and how much that means to student athletes. It's a lot. It's your life then. So it's really important and cool to be able to kind of tell some of those stories. I've always been interested in storytelling and that takes a different iterations as different media across social, digital, video, print, whatever, but it's always storytelling and that's kind of been the root of everything that I've always been interested in. And that's what, sports has so many great stories to tell. So that's why it's been fun to be a part of.
Well, you were there during, a heyday, and I just read this morning that one of the great football coaches in the history of Syracuse football, George DeLeon, passed away. And I know what an impact he had on a lot of student athletes. And so during that time, you saw, Jim Boeheim and Paul Pasqualoni and, the great lacrosse coaches that had transitioned through there. So now you have this great experience. You expose all these athletes. You're marrying your passion with your academic interests and your professional interests. So you launch into your professional career. Tell us how athletics prepared you and your work in athletics prepared you for the professional world.
Yeah, I mean, I went right into the lacrosse media world right out of college. I had never really kind of took the job sight unseen and ended up moving out of Baltimore without really having checked out the office, which was really an apartment and not much of an office at the time, but with Inside Lacrosse back then. But it was my I looked at other like newspaper jobs in small markets and wasn't really interested in starting out in a small market. It was tough to start out in a bigger market in that time if you wanted to be in the newspaper world. So, you kind of had, so this opportunity to go to Baltimore, which was, middle-sized city and an exciting opportunity to kind of be at the top of sport, to be able to cover the elite parts of the sport from as a 22-year-old was intriguing. But, obviously my experience covering the sport for, 4 years there, you kind of get involved with the community pretty quickly and get to know a lot of people, especially at Syracuse, which is kind of, obviously one of the hotbeds and the epicenter for a lot of the people and the personalities and the evolutions of the sport. So that was cool. And kind of came down and Inside Lacrosse at the time was just a couple of us. And, my bedroom was in the back and the office was in the living room. And it was a pretty bare bones operation. I actually slept on a couch that was in the store. One of the bedrooms was a storage room, which was all magazines. And then all I had was a couch. And then eventually that got turned into, I was able to throw a mattress on top of magazines that was my box spring. So eventually that was steps along the way, but it was cool to kind of be part of something like, that was, before kind of startups became so sexy as they are now, everybody's starting up companies. But, back then, that was the culture. And we, you did everything. When the magazines arrived, you unloaded them and then you're writing the same articles that you were unloading, in the back of the apartment. So that was kind of a cool to be. And I think that's important, in my mind, to be able to start at a smaller company where you're doing everything, you're wearing a lot of hats. I think as an early 20-year-old, I think that's really important to learn everything. And that was kind of coached into me when I was looking at options coming out of college, a bigger company or a smaller company, you're going to do a lot more. You're going to learn a lot more. You don't really know what you want to do yet at that point. So being exposed to a lot of different things and being able to take on different, stretch assignments and different things that maybe you never thought you'd be doing, I think is really important and helps with your kind of learning evolution process at that age. So I would encourage everybody. I liked the smaller vibe, and even if you're at a bigger company, like try to do as much as you can and try to learn and do stuff outside of whatever your kind of window is. Try to expand that window as much as you can, because it's just good for your development and exposure too, from a networking perspective.
I'm disappointed to hear that you weren't in the penthouse at the top of the World Trade Center in Baltimore overlooking the Inner Harbor when you started.
Not quite.
You actually had to work for it, huh?
Yep. Which I think is important, right? I mean, everybody talks about sweat equity and the impact that has. And that's why a lot of people are starting their own companies. They want to be their own boss and control their own destiny, but they also want to, kind of understand every part of a business. And that's pretty cool, I think, to your development. So it was a pretty raw beginning back then, but we eventually were able to carve out even a full bedroom for me, and then a full office for us in Towson, and then downtown in Baltimore eventually, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So, just great stories, those memories, and great foundational blocks to your career. So you get this opportunity to move to Western New York, to Buffalo, to work in the Martin Group. You start to carve out a niche. It's the beginning of digital marketing and social media, probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. And so, tell us how digital marketing allows the entrepreneur to launch, and the skills that may have taken multiple people 25, 30 years ago, you can now do through digital technology, through marketing, websites, social media. Tell us how you've applied that now to your entrepreneurial spirit in your own mind.
Yeah, I mean, you're so much closer to consumer now with social media. I mean, you're right there. There's no barrier anymore. You can reach people directly. You don't need a storefront. You don't even need a website in a lot of cases. So when I came up, 8 years ago, they were looking to kind of start a social media, department really. And my journalism experience, again, getting back to the storytelling component was there. So it kind of applied that. And what we did at Inside Lacrosse was really, activate our advertisers within our own properties, print, digital, events, social, et cetera. So similar at an agency where, clients come to you and say, hey, I have X amount of dollars to spend. I want to accomplish this. I want to reach this audience. How do I reach them? How do I get to them? How do I accomplish my goals? And then you have to kind of figure out what the tactics are around that. So obviously digital is part of everything that we do now. We're a full service agency with, big national, international clients, and, down to regional clients as well. So the challenges are unique for everybody. The audiences are different for everybody. And obviously what they're selling is different. So the digital side is exciting because obviously it changes by the day, social changes by the day, but they're all interconnected, and the metrics and the data and really the impact that you can have is so great compared to, a billboard or even a radio ad or a TV ad. It's just so much closer and so much more direct. You can see you're building relationships, you're building community with people. So especially from an entrepreneurial perspective, you really need to focus on those, digital social channels as much as possible, because they're more efficient dollars wise, but they're also more direct. And the most important thing you can do, I think, in building a business, building anything, really, career is community, is building a community and kind of gathering more people, whether that's your own network or that's, kind of the audience interested in your content, your products. And, we coach a lot of our clients on, adding value and providing something that's going to make somebody's life easier, better, their job better, make them smarter, from a content perspective. So focus on that more than selling their products. It's not always an easy sell because there's not a direct ROI on that, but I think it's so important from a brand perspective, from a company perspective, to try to add value and to try to give your kind of thought leadership, education, entertainment too, but really try to provide value to your audience as much as you can, and that's where digital and social become crucial tactics, I think.
Yeah, great advice, and I agree. And so now, the Players NIL is about education for college athletes and high school athletes, student athletes. And one of the core pillars is social media and digital marketing. And so, again, in today's news, the PGA Tour has announced last year's winners of the Player Impact Program, PIP, where they put a pool of money, I believe it was $40 million last year, out there for the top 10 influencers in golf, players on the PGA Tour. And of course, with no surprise, the announced winner today was Tiger Woods. So, clearly a dynamic force in his heyday, but still able to create an audience, engage an audience, and tell us about, how digital marketing can help student athletes, and tell us a little bit about the risks and the pitfall of social media digital marketing to student athletes today.
Yeah, huge risk reward there, obviously, especially with NIL now. But I think as you're seeing with some of these early NIL deals, like it's not necessarily the star quarterback or the star point guard that's getting all the dollars, although they're probably driving a lot of it. But some people, and we look into this a lot with our influencer marketing, kind of research. But like, there's some amazing, talented athletes that have huge TikTok followings and huge, Instagram followings because they're putting out good content that's entertaining and interesting and authentic to what they do. So, but you have to obviously make sure that it's it's authentic first and foremost, but safe. You don't want to do anything too risky, I don't think, from a college perspective. But there's tremendous value if you can put out really good content and start early. I mean, those who started on TikTok, years ago have benefited greatly. But that platform, I think, continues to be a huge driver of money in these NIL deals, I think, because a lot of brands are still trying to figure out how best to activate on that platform. I think more and more are doing it and figuring it out. But athletes, especially who've been on there for a while and are putting out good content, are hugely valuable from a brand perspective. So if you can put out good kind of quality content that's not risky, but safe and entertaining, I mean, it's a different mindset, I think, a little bit to understand what works on TikTok. You have to kind of follow the trends and really kind of understand what's working on the platform. But if you have that talent and that ability, you can do it for sure. Get in there and brand yourself. And I think it's really important to think about what your content strategy is, not just put out stuff to put out stuff. I think we kind of coach a lot of agents on, at least from like a professional athlete's level, is like, what does your athlete want to be after they're done playing? And same question for an athlete, like, what do you want to be eventually? Like, do you want to be an entrepreneur? Do you want to be a corporate, at the corporate level? Do you want to be marketing, sales? Do you want to be a coach? Do you want to be a trainer? Do you want to be a commentator on your sport? Do you want to be kind of more of an investor on that side? Like, where do you want to be eventually? It's hard to think about content that's going to get you there, that's going to attract the right sponsors, businesses, connections to that path. And it doesn't have to be that locked in, but if you can at least give some thought to that and then kind of think about what kind of content is going to support that, that's going to help you get a job first and foremost, because it's going to, be the first thing people look at when they interview you for a job is probably going to be your LinkedIn, but then maybe also your Instagram and kind of the other handles that they can get access to publicly. So making sure those are obviously first and foremost safe and something that you would show your parents, really, but also on brand with what your brand is. You got to kind of give some thought to what your personal brand is and who you want to be, which is your personal brand. So what is that going to be? Where do you want to be eventually? And then how do you kind of get to that? How do you set up a path for yourself content wise and kind of social wise that's going to get you there? So it's not easier said than done for, an 18 to 22-year-old probably, but it's something you need to kind of have a little bit of kind of foresight to think about, where you want to be 5 to 10 years later, and who are the connections you want to make, who are the people that you want to attract to your platform, because you now have an audience, you have a megaphone that you can attract whoever you want to that platform. So think about who you want to be in that audience, in your audience, and then kind of how you're going to speak to them down the line.
Great. You answered my third question without me even asking it. So you're a great guest. If people want to learn more about you and the Martin Group, where do they go? What's your website? What's your handles?
Yeah, martingroup.co is the website, and Martin Group Co is our handles on social. We're pretty active we're decently active on social, but as I mentioned, I head up our sports practice, our sports vertical. We work with New Air Cap and Under Armour and Puma and Asics, and there's some big clients in there that we've worked with, but also again some smaller sports startups, but some smaller startups in general. But we work across, food and beverage, Wegmans, and some others like that. So we have, kind of a full service of operations. But my job is to really bring in, a lot of my job is growth. So how do we grow as an agency? So if they're, kind of bringing in brands that are going to be good partners, that are on their way up, that are, doing exciting things, that are best in class in their own worlds, is kind of part of what I'm trying to do, which honestly, my sports connections have been a huge part of, so probably a lot of people out there that have gotten emails from me that, haven't talked to me in 10 years since my Inside Lacrosse days, and just wanted to catch up and kind of see what they're doing. There's that's what's great about sports, is that, some people move on to do some really cool, interesting things as entrepreneurs, but also with other companies. And it's kind of cool to follow along, with their progress and kind of catch up. So if anybody, obviously we're a very entrepreneurial agency. So always looking for new partners and good partners. Constructive growth is a big part of what we do. So yeah, always looking to bring on new companies into the mix and work with them and help them take to the next level.
Awesome. Well, John, you're a great example of how someone has used athletics and their sports fandom to better their life. And now, the father of 2 young girls and, your career and everything. So, my hat's off to you and congratulations on all of that. Thank you for being my guest today in the Players NIL podcast. And we wish you nothing but success in Western New York.
Well, thanks so much. I look forward. I love what you're doing with the Players NIL. I think it's a huge opportunity. And I think with the right strategy approach, players need to put time and effort and strategy into what they're doing there, and it will pay off. And now all of a sudden you can make some dollars on the side as a college athlete, and that's great. And that makes playing college sports and high school sports that much more beneficial. As if there wasn't enough already in terms of team building and character building and networking. Now you can kind of start building that professional network and putting a foundation in there the right way if you're doing it early on. So I think it's good. It's obviously needs focus and needs the right kind of strategy in place. But I think there's a huge opportunity, and I think what you're doing is great with your experience and your son's experiences and all that. I think there's a lot going on here. So great stuff, and wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you.